Hello and welcome to the Masonic Authors Guild International. This is Robert L.D. Cooper with Mark A. Tabbert. We are Magi. Our mission is to promote the highest standards in education, research and publications relating to the global phenomenon of Freemasonry.
This is Samuel Biagetti reading an excerpt from my dissertation, The Only Universal Monarchy, Freemasonry, Ritual, and Gender in Revolutionary Rhode Island. And this is Chapter 2, The Unfinished Temple, Interpreting Masonic Ritual, Section 3, Masonic Degree Rituals. Masonic lodges observed a great variety of rituals, which served to induct men into the fraternity and to pass on its esoteric knowledge. The rites also offered them spiritual purification, drawing on long traditions of esoteric thought and symbolism. A number of manuscripts describing Masonic initiation rituals and catechisms, probably used as memory aids, survive from the turn of the 18th century. The earliest known such document is the Edinburgh Register House manuscript, which was found in a government archive on a folded sheet of legal paper, labeled Some Questions Anent the Mason Word, 1696. The manuscript is believed to reflect the practices of the Edinburgh Lodge, which at the time was composed predominantly of operative stonemasons, and it shows an already fairly complex system of rituals and esoteric symbols built upon 2 degrees of initiation, entered apprentice and fellow craft. The Edinburgh Register House manuscript forms a natural starting point for a consideration of the 3 basic craft degrees of Masonry and the system of beliefs that they propagated. It would be impossible to examine exhaustively the mythic and ritual structures reflected in the manuscript, but we must consider a few central patterns that the document reveals. The first is a chain of correspondences connecting the individual body to the cosmos. The manuscript begins with a catechism of questions, quote, that Masons use to put to those who have the word before they will acknowledge them. These questions discuss the lodge as an imagined sacred space housing symbolic images, much like the Hermetic memory temple. For instance, the questioner asks the visitor, "Are there any lights in your lodge?" To which he responds, "Yes, 3, the northeast, southwest, and eastern passage. The one denotes the master mason, the other the warden, the third the setter croft." At the same time, the lodge is set in parallel with the individual body. When the questioner asks, "Where shall I find the key of your lodge?" the visitor responds, quote, 3 foot and a half from the lodge door under a perpend esler and a green divot, but under the lap of my liver where all the secrets of my heart lie, end quote. Thus, the imagined lodge building represents at once a social and physical gathering space and an individual man's body, in which he carries the Masonic secrets. The final questions put to a man claiming to be an entered apprentice drive this association home. Question: which is the key of your lodge? Answer: a well-hung tongue. Question: where lies the key? Answer: in the bone box. According to later catechisms, the bone box is either the mouth or the skull. At the same time, while the preceding questions associate the lodge downward in a series of correspondences with the individual body, other questions associate it upward as an image of Solomon's temple. Question: how stands your lodge? Answer: east and west as the temple of Jerusalem. Question: where was the first lodge? Answer: in the porch of Solomon's temple. In addition, the passwords of the 2 degrees of initiation, guarding the lodge's sacred space, are Jachin and Boaz, the names of the pillars flanking the entranceway to Solomon's temple. The Masons' old charges, or mythic histories, claim that the fraternity's customs originated from the construction of the temple, and their myths particularly linked the fraternity with Solomon and Hiram of Tyre. The esoteric intelligentsia of the 1600s venerated Solomon's temple as the symbol of a divine order on earth, or more properly, a microcosm of the universe, modeling the relations between the human and divine worlds. The Catechism in Masonry Dissected, first printed at London in 1730 and reprinted at Newport in 1749-50, further develops the theme of the lodge as a sacred space, corresponding both to the temple and to the cosmos. When asked how high his lodge stands, the entered apprentice is to answer, quote, "inches, feet, and yards innumerable, as high as the heavens." Question, "how deep?" Answer, "to the center of the earth." Furthermore, the lodge recreates the sanctity of holy buildings by mimicking their east-west orientation. Question, "how is the lodge situated?" Answer, "east and west." Question, "why so?" Answer, "because all churches and chapels are or ought to be so." The correct orientation of the lodge, whether literal or merely figurative, traces both the path of the sun and the corresponding path of the pilgrimage towards knowledge. The lodge master stands in the east because, quote, "as the sun rises in the east and opens the day, so the master stands in the east to open his lodge." And the visitor professes to be traveling from west to east, quote, "to seek that which is lost and is now found." Masons took this orientation seriously. In 1802, Thomas Smith Webb supported a proposal to rearrange the furniture of St. John's Lodge of Providence in order to move the worshipful master's chair away from the doorway. Some brethren objected, insisting that the master must sit in the east. Webb responded that the east was merely symbolic and that the room's literal physical arrangement was immaterial. The incident is interesting in part as an illustration of the tension between literal and figurative interpretations of ritual, which seems to be universal to all religions. In sum, the symbolic world of Masonry revolved around a vertical axis, a chain of sympathies and correspondences connecting the human body to the lodge, the temple, and the cosmos. One gained access to this symbolic world through rituals of initiation, which prepared the mind and body to enter a new realm. The Edinburgh Register House manuscript gives a rough outline of the rituals of initiation for the entered apprentice and fellow craft degrees, which later manuscripts and printed exposures tend to fill in with more detail. The apprentice initiation begins with the candidate being placed on his knees after, quote, "a great many ceremonies to frighten him," and putting his right hand on a Bible. The brethren, quote, "conjure him to secrecy by administering an oath and threatening, quote, that if he shall break his oath, the sun in the firmament will be a witness against him, which will be an occasion of his damnation, and that likewise the Masons will be sure to murder him." End quote. The casting of the sun as a judging witness prefigures the appearance of the so-called all-seeing eye, or an eye surrounded by a sunburst, as seen on Masonic certificates, carpets, and aprons of the 18th century. Having accepted the oath, the candidate is ready to be exposed to Masonic secrets. The youngest of the brethren then leads the candidate out of the lodge, quote, "where after he is sufficiently frighted with 1,000 ridiculous postures and grimaces, he is taught the sign and the postures and words of his entry." Having mastered these, the candidate returns to the lodge, makes a, quote, "ridiculous bow, swears to keep the keys," meaning secrets, of the lodge, quote, "under no less pain than having my tongue cut out under my chin." Thereafter, quote, "all Masons present whisper among themselves the word, beginning at the youngest, till it come to the Master Mason, who gives the word to the entered apprentice." End quote. The Edinburgh Register House manuscript demonstrates several important facts about Masonic ritual. Firstly, it is not only a record of verbal knowledge, but a manual for enacting a drama that no document can fully capture. The entered apprentice ritual and the catechism reveal that the Masonic secrets are bodily just as much as they are verbal or conceptual. Every stage of the ritual is punctuated with dramatic physical actions and movements. For example, when describing the penalty for divulging Masonic secrets, the initiate, quote, "makes the sign again withdrawing his hand under his chin alongst his throat," end quote. Even in the Catechism, the manuscript includes rudimentary stage directions, noting that the visitor must identify the penalty for revealing secrets, quote, "which is then cutting of your throat, for you must make that sign when you say that," end quote. On a practical level, all of these bodily movements surely help to ingrain the secret knowledge in the candidate's memory, while symbolically they underscore the parallels between the corporeal body and the social body of the lodge. One could not truly learn the Mason's secrets by reading a printed exposure, but only by experiencing the ritual in action. The physical nature of the Masonic secrets only becomes more important in the second or fellow craft degree as described in the Edinburgh manuscript, which includes the so-called 5 points of fellowship. The fellow craft initiation follows the exact same structure as the first degree, only with a new set of secret words and signs. At the conclusion, the candidate places himself, quote, in the posture he is to receive the word, and greets the company present 3 times. Finally, the lodge master approaches the candidate and, quote, gives him the word and grips his hand after the Mason's way, which is all that is to be done to make him a perfect Mason, end quote. The secret grip, only alluded to in the ritual directions, is described in more detail in the Catechism. The new fellow craft must embrace his brother, quote, foot to foot, knee to knee, heart to heart, hand to hand, and ear to ear. At which point the 2 men whisper to one another the passwords Jachin and Boaz. The 5 points of fellowship vary slightly in later manuscripts. The 5 points of fellowship are a complex exercise that can probably only be learned by muscle memory, reflecting the essential connection between the verbal and bodily knowledge in Masonry. Another dimension of Masonic ritual that the Edinburgh manuscript makes explicit is the manipulation of emotion. The author only alludes to the preparatory stages preceding the administering of the candidate's oath, calling them, quote, a great many ceremonies to frighten the initiate. Similarly, when he withdraws, he is, quote, frighted with 1,000 ridiculous postures and grimaces. Far from undermining the seriousness of the ceremony, for most candidates, these ridiculous practices only heightened it. The so-called solemnity of Masonic ritual, as so many Masonic authors called it, was closely connected to fear. The reasons that Masons chose to frighten their candidates extend beyond the need to deter new members from divulging Masonic secrets, and can only be fully appreciated in light of the purposes that initiatory rituals tend to serve. The initiations described in the Edinburgh manuscript and later exposures conform to the basic patterns of so-called rites of passage, as practiced in many societies throughout the world. As the anthropologist Arnold van Gennep finds in his famous 1909 study, Les Rites de Passage, many societies practice similar, quote, ceremonial patterns which accompany a passage from one situation to another or from one cosmic or social world to another, end quote. These ritual processes tend to be patterned on the rites of territorial transition performed at borders, gates, or thresholds, which usually involve prayers or offerings. Seeing as how social worlds are divided into sacred realms in much the same manner as buildings, cities, and lands, social rites of passage mimic threshold ceremonies. When a person joins a social group or takes a new office, he or she undergoes rituals involving 3 stages: so-called separation, in which one severs one's existing ties; transition, in which one exists in a suspended, in-between state, often likened to death; and incorporation, in which one bonds to the new social group and begins a new life. The ceremonies as a whole serve to foster attachment and conformity to the new group and to smooth the traumatic abruptness of the change. In Masonry, the symbolic parallel between the threshold and the entry into a social group is made explicit. The imaginary doorway of the lodge is marked by Jachin and Boaz, the pillars that flank the entranceway to Solomon's temple, demarcating the threshold of a sacred space. The Fellow Crafts Catechism, recorded in Masonry Dissected, involves a careful delineation of the spaces within the temple through which the brother has passed, from the porch or entered apprentice degree to the middle chamber or fellow craft degree. The questioner asks, question, when you came through the porch, what did you see? Answer, 2 great pillars. Question, what are they called? Answer, JB, i.e. Jachin and Boaz. Furthermore, the Masonic rites of initiation practiced in the 18th century follow the basic tripartite structure of rites of passage, as an examination of surviving documents will show. Later books published in the 18th century give greater details as to the Masonic rites than the Edinburgh Register House manuscript does. The Masonic exposure Jachin and Boaz, or An Authentic Key to the Door of Freemasonry, first published in London in 1762, provides a detailed account of Masonic rituals purportedly in their so-called ancient form, and probably provides the closest possible facsimile of the craft degrees as practiced in Rhode Island in the later 18th century. The initiation ritual described in Jachin and Boaz follows the same basic format as that recorded in the Edinburgh manuscript, but includes more details about the beginning of the ceremony, which represents the separation phase of the rite. It begins with the brother who initially proposed the candidate announcing that the latter is ready to undergo the ritual. The sponsor then leads the candidate into a separate, darkened room, wherein he removes all metal from the initiate's person, quote, buttons, buckles, rings, and even the money in his pocket, end quote. In some cases, the candidate is even obliged to remove clothing containing lace, presumably because lace may contain gold or silver threads. The sponsor then has the candidate uncover his right knee, ordinarily by rolling up his breeches or trousers, and places an unwieldy slipper over his left foot or shoe. He is then blindfolded and left in the dark and silence for about half an hour. The long wait in silence allows time for the brethren to prepare the lodge room with the necessary objects and images. But it also completes the stage of separation, which involves the symbolic cutting of ties with one's old self, a literal or figurative stripping down, exemplified in this instance by the divestment of possessions and clothing. The period of darkness and silence further forces the candidate to leave thoughts of the outside world behind, and probably puts him into a trance-like mental state with the senses heightened.
This podcast is for educational purposes and perhaps entertainment. While the Masonic Authors Guild International provides the most accurate information possible, listeners use this information at their own risk. This podcast and its contents are Magi's property, as are all the opinions, information it presents. Robert L.D. Cooper's, Mark A. Tabert's, and Sam Biagetti's views and opinions within this podcast do not represent nor speak for Freemasonry, any Masonic organization, their former or current employers, in any way, shape, or form. Magi, Cooper, or Tabert, or Biagetti will not compensate you in any way whatsoever if you ever happen to suffer an inconvenience due to the information herein contained.